Today we're going to be talking about the role of a Notary Public in real estate transactions in Ceara. Hello there, my name is Luciano Oliveira. I am a Brazilian attorney. I'm here in Fortaleza, Ceara, and we're going to be talking about the role of a Notary Public in real estate transactions in Ceara. First thing, Notary Public is actually a mistranslation. If you're from the US, you probably know that a Notary Public is going to be a clerk who's working at UPS and authenticate a document by checking a person's ID, and that's pretty much it. In Brazil, on the other hand, the Notary Public is actually the officer of a registry called Cartorio in Brazil, and this Cartorio has a function of not only validating documents, but they are also in charge of supervising a closing in real estate. And there are different types of Cartorios for different purposes, but for this video in particular we're going to be talking about the Cartorio in charge of the closing. So the Notary Public is going to be in charge of supervising the closing. In Brazil, there are no title agencies like in the US. You're gonna hire a title company. This company is gonna handle the paperwork. They also gonna provide an insurance. So if you're buying a bad title property, they are gonna refund your monies if that happens. And they're also gonna provide you with an escrow account. So you're not gonna pay the seller, you're gonna send the funds to the escrow. And once the paperwork is on point, after the seller signs the transfer deed, the escrow company are going to release the funds to the seller. Unfortunately, in Brazil, we don't have title insurance and we don't have escrow accounts. Thus, the importance of getting a very thorough due diligence done, and also to be able to release the funds to the seller at the last minute, right? Like there is no escrow, the seller is not going to sign the transfer deed unless the seller is paid. So what we do for our clients is to work with a currency exchange bank, and by partnering with this currency exchange bank, we are able to time the release of the funds on the same day of the closing. So this reduces the risks associated substantially, because if you just do a regular wire transfer into the seller's account, there is no way for you to control when the money is going to release. There is a lot of red tape in Brazil. Whenever you send a wire to Brazil, the money doesn't get automatically released into the seller's account. A compliance process is required, and this compliance process may take several days or even a couple of weeks, and so you are unable to control the day when the funds are going to be released. When we work with a currency exchange bank, on the other hand, we are able to time the release and thus reduce the risk, because there is no such a huge gap between the day when the seller is going to get the funds and the day when the transfer deed is going to be signed. So going back to the Notary Public's role, first thing they are going to ask you for is a copy of the contract. That's where they are going to get basic information about the transaction. They are also going to ask you for clearance certificates. The clearance certificates are called in Portuguese certidões negativas, and these clearance certificates, they are going to be saying that from the government perspective, the seller and the property are in a position to participate in a sale. The government also wants to know that the seller doesn't have labor lawsuits. It's very common for employees to sue their employers. So all of that entangles in the transaction, and you're gonna need to provide clearance certificates, again, not only for the property or the seller's taxes, but also regarding any kind of labor issues related to the sellers. Once all the clearance certificates are taken care, the head of the Cartório or the Notary Public is gonna ask you to present proof of payment for the transfer taxes, and transfer taxes in Fortaleza and Ceara, they are going to range between 2% and 4% of the property value, and they are also going to ask you to provide the payment for the closing costs. The costs for the Cartório, where the Notary Public works. There is a second registry, is another type of Cartório, where the actual deed is going to be issued. In the US, there is the title company who's going to handle the closing. So in Brazil, this is going to be the first registry, the first cartório. And in the United States, usually it's going to be the county where the property is that's going to be in charge of issuing the deed. So in Brazil, this county role is going to be performed by a second type of registry. Going back to the first registry, after the Notary Public has all the paperwork, they are going to schedule a day for the actual closing. And for Fortaleza, the name of the registry is Tabelião de Notas. There are several registries of this kind in Fortaleza, and you can pick any of them. In our case, we work with two of them and we have close professional relationships, so we are able to get things expedited. So once you know a specific Notary Public and you've been working with this Notary Public for a while, you know exactly the things that the Notary Public is going to ask. On the other hand, the Notary Public knows about the law firm. The law firm is taking good care of the paperwork. So all of this is going to create a synergy for the transaction. On the day of the closing, usually you're going to attend the closing to simply sign the papers. We usually want the sellers in particular to be in person at the registry. We don't like sellers to participate through a power of attorney because it's important for us to know that the seller is in a good state of mind. In Fortaleza, there are many elderly citizens, and if you have someone signing through a power of attorney, another person would be present at the closing on behalf of the actual seller. It could be the case that maybe the seller is in hospice and maybe they are not in a good state of mind, and this transaction could be disputed by the heirs later on. So you don't want to be in this position where you go through the closing and a couple of years down the road someone is going to raise a claim that the seller didn't participate in the closing, and now they are disputing the sale and trying to recover the property, which could happen in Brazil even after all the paperwork has been completed. We try to avoid sellers participating through a power of attorney, and we have that in our contract. And if they know the seller cannot participate in a closing in person, they're going to say, oh, I don't accept this clause, and then we're probably going to just move to another property. After the transfer deed has been signed by all parties, the closing it's done. Usually a couple of days later, you're going to get an official, a transcript of the closing, and that's going to be the so-called escritura. The escritura in Portuguese, it means this document that's going to represent that the transaction, that the sale actually took place and it was done according to everything that the law requires. And then this registry is going to send a copy of the escritura, the signed transfer deed, to the second registry, which could also be translated by a Notary Public, but again, we know it's a mistranslation. Then the second registry, which is called in Portuguese, Registro de Imóveis. The second registry who's going to review the escritura, the transfer deed that was signed, and other documents to make sure that everything was done properly. And then they are going to issue a new copy of the deed, which in Portuguese is going to be called Matrícula do Imóvel, or RGI, Registro Geral do Imóvel, with the name of the buyer as the most current owner, or the owner in the chain of title, trying to make a parallel to how this works in the US. I hope this was helpful. If you have questions, feel free to post your questions below and follow us for more tips.